Hi, and welcome to the HANA Academy. My name's Philip, and in this video tutorial series, we're showing you how to build an end-to-end solution in HANA 2.0 based on a live Twitter feed. In this video, we're going to create our UAA, or User Authentication and Authorization service, so that we can control who accesses our different modules as part of our Live5 application. Now, we're not able to do all of that out of the box with Web IDE for HANA. We're going to need to use the XS command line, basically the XS command tool that will allow us to do some specific configuration to do that. And we're also going to need some code snippets. So the first thing we can do is to go to GitHub. Remember the HANA Academy GitHub URL. Probably you have this on a bookmark by now. And we'll go to Live5. And you'll see that there is a file right at the end, xs-security.json. So what I might want to do is to actually download that file. So you can choose to download it, or you can copy and paste, whatever works for you. So I'm actually going to just copy it in this case. I'm going to create a file with the same name. So in my Live5 project, I'm going to create an xs-security, so new file, then xs-security.json, and it does need to be using that name. We'll see that's a dependency we'll have later, and I'll just paste in the JSON. So what this file specifies is that we've got an app called Live5. Okay, that corresponds to our app. We're going to define a scope which is called a Live5 user. At this point, we're not going to have a difference between admin and end user. It's just going to be anyone that can use the Live5 application. So we're going to create a user scope, and notice we use $XS app name. This saves us having to hard code multiple times in there. We need to just specify the XS app name once. And also we're going to specify a role template, which we'll call Live5 user, which has a reference to our scope, which is the scope we've just defined before. So this is where we set up some of the configuration of what our UAA, or User Authentication and Authorization service, will have. Let's save that file. Now, it's very important that you put that file in your Live5 project in the root folder. We'll see that later when we want to deploy to production. But to actually just create this service as we're working as a developer in Web IDE for HANA, what we're going to need to do is take this file and export it. So I'm going to just export that, put that in my downloads folder. And then I'm going to use the XS command line. Now you can either use PuTTY to connect to your server or another means, or in my case, I've got the XS command tools installed on my Windows client, so I can just easily use the XS command. So the first thing I might want to do is to go and actually just check I can connect to XS, and then L for login, and then -u for user, and then XSA admin. I need to be working as the admin user. So let's just check that it's connecting to our backend. I'm going to put in the password for our XSA administrator, and we can see we're connected. Now the next thing I need to do is ensure that I'm targeting the correct space, and we're going to be creating our service in the developer space. So for that, I would use the command xst, and then that's for target, and then -s for space, and dev. In fact, it already was using it, but I've shown you the command anyway that allows you to change and target a specific space. Then we can see, well, what services exist. If we do XS services, we should find that there are no services right now. No services found. Same thing we can do for apps. We can actually look and say XS apps. In our case, we may well find that we've got an app. Yep, we've actually got an app, which is our UI dev. That's the second one we see in that list. DI Builder is actually an app that runs within your space, which is used when you build and run your modules. So that's a kind of infrastructure. So you'll always expect to find DI Builder. In fact, we enabled that in a previous video. We've got no service created at the moment. What we're going to need to do is issue a specific create service command. So for that, we'd use XS and then create service. We need to say it's an XS User Authentication and Authorization service. We're going to use dev user, which basically says we're doing this for development user. And then we need to give it a name. So we're going to call it Live5 UAA. So that name, again, we're going to reference it elsewhere, so it's important that you do use that name. And you need to specify where the excess security JSON file is. So with a -C for your config file, and then we'd actually specify the folder where we're going to find it. Now, actually, in our case, we put it in the downloads folder, so we'd put downloads and then excess-security.json. Of course, you could always change into your downloads folder if you want to make it a little bit simpler. So let's now go ahead and try that. We can see the service has been created. If we now do access services, we see that the Live5 UAA access user authentication authorization service has been created. So that's great. We've now created the service we need, but we also now need to actually assign rights based on that authorization service. And to do that, we're going to use the access administrator. So again, it's something you've seen in previous videos. So what I'm going to do is open up an incognito tab. The reason for that is simply that it avoids us having to log in and log out as a developer user within Web IDE for HANA. I'm going to go to the access administrator. Again, I've got this. You've seen this in previous videos. We've used it before. I've got it as a favorite on my toolbar. I log in as the administrator, XSA_admin, with the password. What I need to now do is actually go to the application role builder, which we see here, and go and build some roles. Now you'll see that in our list of applications, we've now got a new one, which is Live5 $U1. That's $U1, exclamation U1 is just simply to make it unique because this is an application we're developing right now. So you can see that application exists, but we need to configure something called a role collection for it. And that you'll find right down in the bottom right. So configure role collections. If I hit that, you'll find that these are the role collections, some of which you've seen before during the setup phase. We're going to create a new one. So being a Fiori app, we're going to hit that plus button. We're going to create a new one. I'm going to call it Live5_user. Give it a description. I recommend you do the same. So we've created a role collection, and we then need to put the role we need into it. So I choose the roles tab, and then the plus for add application role. And here you choose your application name, which is what we saw a minute ago when we saw the list of apps. And there we find now we've got Live5 $U1. We've got the template, which was Live5 user. And we've got the application role, again, Live5 user. These are things that we actually set up in our excess-security.json file. So let's hit OK. Now save it. So that's now saved. We set up a role collection. We can go back to our main admin menu. The final thing is we need to assign that role to someone, and then we're working as a developer, so let's give rights to our developer. So there we'll go to user management and choose our XSA_dev, look at his role or her role collections. We see it's got authorized to be a developer, etc., but we need to use the add button. And then if we scroll down, we should find Live5_user, which is the name of our role collection we just created. We now assign that and save it so that the XSA dev should be allowed to use the application. Okay, that's all we basically need to do in terms of the service setup. However, what we do need to do now is to actually finalize how that's going to be used by our application. We've actually created it, but now we have to make it used. So for that, what we're going to do is go into the UI dev module, and we're going to specify in the XS app JSON file, because that's where we specify authentication method. Instead of none, which means nothing, we're going to specify root, so a root-based authentication. So let's save that. And there's one other thing we need to do. We need to actually specify our service in the MTA YAML file, because at the moment we've got a module, but we've not mentioned that we're actually got a user authentication and authorization service. Now the easy way to do that is to go back to our GitHub and look at the MTA YAML. And you'll find there that we've got, for our UI dev module, we've got a couple of lines, so requires, and then the name of a service called Live5 UAA. So I'm going to paste that in. Remember, when you're working with a YAML file like this, it's indentations, it's not tabs. You have to be very careful with the syntax, but normally Web IDE will help you. But we also have to specify that service as a resource in our project. So for that, I'm going to come and add a new section called resources underneath. Let's just make sure it's in the right columns. So we've got a resources section, which is called Live5 UAA, and it's the type of its XS UAA, and we specify the path which is relative to this XS security JSON. Now it's not using it right now, but it's going to use that later when we deploy to production. So it's very important that you use the same file name and you put it in the same place, even if we didn't directly use it a moment ago when we created our developer version of the service. So we can hit save. And now if we go ahead and run the application, so we can go to UI dev and choose the run index HTML. Normally it will rebuild your application and run it directly. You don't need to go and explicitly build it before you run. It may take a few seconds. And you can see that it pops up a login. That's what we'd expect. And if I put in my XSA_dev user with his password, we should be able to see that it works. So what we've seen in this video is how we can set up a user authentication and authorization service, and we can set up our application to actually make use of it. Set up the requires in MTA YAML, set up the resources for that service in the MTA YAML, and in the XS app of our module, then we specify authentication method as being root. So now we're done with creating our module and making sure it's fully authenticated. What we're going to do in the next video is start creating database artifacts, and Bob's going to be showing you that. You can find more HANA video tutorials on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to be informed as soon as new video tutorials are published, please subscribe to the channel. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, and we have pages on Facebook and Google+. Code snippets for all of our tutorials are published to GitHub. Thanks for watching.